Hey y'all, coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, Senior Consultant at RefTellus and GovLove co-host. We've got a great episode for you today. We're going to be talking parks and the riverfront in Memphis. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. Engaging local government leaders is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. And your membership helps directly support this podcast. So if you want to hear more great conversations about local government, go become a member today. Now, let me introduce today's guest. Coletta is the president and CEO of the Memphis River Parks Partnership, a position she's been in since 2018. Memphis River Parks Partnership is a nonprofit that stewards the riverfront on behalf of the people of Memphis. And before joining the partnership, Carol was a senior fellow for the Kresge Foundation and vice president of community and national initiatives for the Knight Foundation. With that, Carol, welcome to GovLove. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Awesome. Yeah, we're excited to talk parks and the riverfront in Memphis. But we have a tradition on the podcast to start with a lightning round to let our guests warm up a little bit, get to know you a little better. So my first question for you: what's the last thing, movie, TV show that you watched?
Okay, I have become addicted to Suits.
Oh, okay.
On Netflix. It was originally on USA Network. I knew nothing about it, Ben. I barely knew. All I knew was Meghan Markle was in it. That's it.
Yeah.
And I am now on the final season, and it's a great diversion.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of content to have gone through. That's impressive. That's awesome. All right. So my next lightning round question for you: what book are you currently reading?
I am embarrassed to admit, with the opening of the park looming, I am not reading any book at all. I am just making long to-do lists.
There you go. That's fair. We understand. Well, yeah, we'll get into kind of the deadline you have looming, but that's totally fair. All right. Then my next lightning round question for you: what's the first concert that you went to?
Oh gosh, the first concert. Oh, that's been a long time ago. Maybe the first big concert I went to was the Beatles.
Oh, nice. That's a great first concert. Yeah, that's enviable.
That's right. That's memorable.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, then my last lightning round question for you: where do you go for inspiration?
Well, the new park we're building.
Yeah.
And that just continues a string of green spaces that have always inspired me in other cities I've lived in. In Chicago, I was lucky enough to live just a few blocks from Millennium Park, where there is Lurie Garden, which I think is one of the most beautiful places in the world. My breathing would actually slow down when I went into Lurie Garden.
Yeah, well said. I can relate to that. Just walking in a park, a nice or a open space, like it just relaxes me too. So that's great. All right. So I always ask the guests, and I'm always curious, how they ended up doing kind of the work that they're doing. So I read a little bit of your bio at the beginning, but how did you end up, doing this work? How did you end up working for, the partnership? What was kind of your path to doing this work?
Well, I always joke and say my path makes no sense except in the rearview mirror. And yet I think this job makes complete sense. Mm-hmm. I never expected to be running parks. I never expected to be working on the riverfront necessarily. But I've had a lifelong love affair with places and making places, and particularly in downtown Memphis. So of all things, I've come full circle, returning back to the place where I was born to work on what I think is a legacy project for Memphis. And having run the Mayor's Institute on City Design, CEOs for Cities, Art Place, where we began the first funding work around creative placemaking, then to Knight Foundation to work in 26 cities, and then Kresge. It's really, it feels very much like a homecoming to be doing the work I'm doing today.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, you're right. Like in rear view, it makes sense. You can kind of see the path, but probably you probably wouldn't have drawn it up at the beginning of your career.
I couldn't have.
Yeah.
A lot of those jobs never existed before I took them. It seems like I'm always doing either a startup or a remake.
Hmm.
And that's been the nature of my career, and that really is the story here as well. It was a remake, a rebrand, a relaunch, and taking a much more aggressive approach to making the most of our riverfront in Memphis.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's a kind of great transition before we talk about what you have planned for, this Labor Day weekend. Can you talk about the Memphis Riverfront Parks or River Parks Partnership a little at a high level? What was that rebrand? What is kind of your guys' mission and kind of your scope of what you're responsible for?
This organization is a 501(c)(3). It began when a former mayor decided the city really could not keep the riverfront for visitors to the city up to a level that that matched the expectations of visitors,
Mm-hmm.
and that was 20 plus years ago. Oddly enough, I was involved in the organization at its very beginning, and so talk about really full circle.
Yeah.
At any rate, for a long time, the organization had been a little bit stuck in place. It was really more into clean and green, not so much in development, although they had done one major project around building a new cruise ship dock
Hmm.
for river going overnight cruise vessels. And so when I came to the organization, we really started to think, how do we make the best set of moves now for linking the riverfront more closely to the city and making it the asset it ought to be.
Yeah.
Memphis is on the Mississippi River at its widest and wildest.
Hmm.
It's the most storied river in the country, if not in the world. And so there's so much potential with the Mississippi, but for reasons I won't go into here, it's been historically hard to access our river. So we began looking around when I got here. Really, before I got here, I was with the Kresge Foundation, and Kresge had done so much for the Detroit riverfront. Looked at the Memphis riverfront, and said, "Why aren't you doing something with your river?"
Hmm.
And so we were able to take that challenge, and Kresge funded a trip for influentials, elected officials, board members of what was then called the RDC. I organized the trip. We did 3 cities, 4 riverfronts in 4 days,
Wow.
whirlwind trip, and
Yeah.
everyone came back and said, "We got to do more with our riverfront." So that began what we call the riverfront concept, that looked at years of planning, 100 years of planning,
Hmm.
really, for the riverfront, and conceptually laid out what the possibilities were. And we all decided that this 130-acre park that was pretty barren at the time was really our strategic target. It's where we should begin the next bit of work. And that is the park we will be opening September 2nd.
That's Tom Lee Park, right?
That's Tom Lee Park.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to talk more about the park. But so, and you said was there a rebrand, or was it kind of a rethinking of the organization as part of that, or you referenced a restructuring? So I'm just curious what that was.
Yeah, we did a rebrand. Yes, it was formerly the Riverfront Development Corporation, and the corporation part threw people off.
Yeah.
I mean, it shouldn't have, but it did. So we took a look at the assets. We manage 5 miles of riverfront
Wow.
for the city of Memphis. Historically, the riverfront was very much in pieces. a park here, a park there. None of them were joined up together.
Hmm.
So we began thinking, how do we make this a seamless riverfront experience with, different purposes in different places, but yet it's all connected together.
Hmm.
And so the rebrand was to Memphis River Parks Partnership, wanting to emphasize the partnership that this really represented, not only with the city of Memphis, who owns the land, certainly with the citizens of Memphis, who, it is their riverfront, but with many, many other people who have to join in this work to get it done.
Yeah.
And so the partnership is the emphasis here.
Yeah. And is that how much kind of data or what I'm always curious, like the partnerships with cities and nonprofits, or private public partnerships. Like, is the relationship just they own and you guys kind of operate, and maintain parks, and do the planning and all that, or is there any other kind of interaction with the city?
Oh, there's interaction almost daily,
Yeah.
and that's a good thing because, again, certainly the city of Memphis, the government representing the citizens of Memphis, is a huge stakeholder in what we do.
Hmm.
So we always have to stay on the same page with government. Obviously, sometimes there's a push-pull. They do provide funding, operational funding for the organization, which provides about a little less than 2/3 of our budget. The
Mm.
rest of it is owned revenue, but it is very important that we maintain that relationship, not just with the administration, but of course also with city council.
Yeah.
And and with, division directors and so forth. So it's really even with city workers, because
Yeah.
they will do some maintenance work for us. That's always valuable. So it's just it's overall, it's been a good relationship. Everybody has the same goal, but obviously, um, we sometimes we have a little bit different set of priorities,
Yeah. Yeah.
and in different ways of getting to the end result that we all want.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's fascinating. So you referenced the park that you guys are opening on this weekend on September 2nd, as we record this weekend. May, but so why was you referenced maybe that this was the first one that you wanted to focus on, or right, or Tom Lee Park. So maybe why was this the one to start with? What about this space or this park was the one that, hey, let's begin here and then kind of, or maybe I'm making too much of an assumption, but beginning here and then expanding kind of out.
Well, let me say, in the last 3-4 years, we've remade two square block parks
Yeah.
that both had Confederate associations,
Oh wow.
which were removed,
Hmm.
and the parks were renamed River Garden and Fourth Bluff Park. We also developed what I would consider a 1.0 version of a pedestrian bike ped trail
Hmm.
along the 5 miles of riverfront. So it's not as if work had not been done,
Yeah.
and good work had
Hmm.
not been done. But the next project that we felt really would be a signature project would be Tom Lee Park. It's arguably the most visible piece of real estate in the
Mm.
city. There are very few people who would come to Memphis thinking uh, of investing, their time, their talent, their money, who would not see this piece of property. It's very visible, 30 acres right on the river,
Wow.
just where the Memphis Harbor joins the Mississippi River, and it has these stunning views across the river to Arkansas, where there is no development. It's all floodplain.
Wow.
So there are times of the year when you look across the river and you see no land. It's really amazing.
Wow.
And then there are times like now when the river's lower, that you just see farmland and floodplain across the river. It's a unique uh, urban riverfront
Yeah.
experience. It is very rare you're standing in a downtown on a waterfront or a riverfront in particular and looking over across the river and not seeing development on the other side.
Yeah.
So it's really this very calm, peaceful, beautiful space. not only in terms of in terms of the view across the river, but the park itself was built years ago on top of a Corps of Engineers dike wall
Mm.
that was to shore up a 30-foot bluff behind it to the east. And it really, I think it had 5 trees on it, literally 5 trees. Nothing would grow there. It was the soil was like concrete. So it had almost no amenities, no landscaping. And when Studio Gang, the firm, Chicago-based firm that did the riverfront concept with us, uh, took a look at that park, they realized its potential to be really transformative right at the city's front door.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, the former Tomley Park projected an image of a very sleepy river town,
Mm.
although it's not that at all.
Yeah.
But that was the image it projected. Now it's this incredibly lush, beautiful, um, tucked in space, and with lots of amenities. And I think now it conveys just the opposite, a very ambitious, forward-leaning city that we can all be proud of.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So, what kind of backing up? I know you're at the end, and almost opening to the public, but but backing up, like what went into that? Like, hey, here we have this piece of land that's got so much potential, but how do you then maximize it? And what went into the design to be like, this is how we make it that active space that you're talking about, that it will be, in a few days.
Well, for the riverfront concept work, we had about 4,000 Memphians involved in that
Oh,
work,
wow.
along with a steering committee that included both our, representatives from government, local government, as well as um, people from the board of the partnership, but also others in the community to say, what might we do with this property? We Once Tomley Park was identified as the next target, we then engaged Studio Gang, which had done the work on the concept, to lead the park design. They brought in Scape, a landscape architecture firm, and again there was uh, deep community engagement and very broad community engagement. And it's quite a story
Yeah.
because we were designing in 2019. There was a hiccup in the design approval that um, is a long story, but it suffice it to say, it required mediation with a group of with a festival that used the park for 7 paid days a year
Hmm.
and had for many years. And they did not want to give up their position and were worried about the new design. So we mediated that 6 months, restarted the design in early January 2020.
Oh, wow.
And we all know what happened in March of
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah.
COVID hit. And so this park we continued. We did not pause like a lot of projects did. We persisted and were able to finish the new design late April, early May. So the design was completed during COVID.
Hmm.
The design was reintroduced to the community during COVID. And so we used lots of online tools, continued to use online tools. And then as people began to get out a little bit, but in the open air, we actually intercepted people on the streets of, near the park.
Yeah.
As people were flooding into the park, using it for, as their respite during COVID. It was unusual. You just couldn't use old engagement,
Yeah.
tried and true engagement techniques.
Yeah.
And I think it made the project really stronger because by going online, we were able to include so many more people in the design work of the park. We also had a wonderful Studio Gang ran a wonderful program for teenagers to get involved
Mm.
in the design, and they did. Um, but at one point, I'll mention this because engagement is such an interesting question for lots of government officials.
Yeah.
Working in an age of social media and working in an age of social media during COVID, where people were angry and
Yeah.
lonely
Yeah.
and upset. Tensions ran very, very high, opinions ran high. So at one point, we actually did a statistically valid political type poll
Mm.
asking people what they thought about the park, just to make sure, social media was not drowning out, the people who just had to get up every morning and homeschool their
Yeah.
kids and get breakfast made and all the things, you have to do in the course of a normal day. Except it wasn't normal. It was during COVID. And we found tremendous support in that political poll or statistically valid poll, and that gave us a lot of courage, to know that we
Mm.
were on the right track, doing the right thing, and then what? Now 3 years later, oh my gosh, 3 years later, we were able to deliver the park.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Well, and the timing that must have been fascinating because you're at a time where, yeah, everybody's online, but also seeking outdoor spaces. And I know in my day job, working with like lots of parks departments across the country, they saw spikes in usage all over the place. So it's almost like it's almost I wonder if you got more interest in that because of the timing during COVID, if you got more engagement because people wanted to see this park now because they had such a demand, or there was such a demand for outside spaces.
I think you're right. I
Yeah.
mean, it certainly changed the conversation
Yeah.
about parks because historically, it's parks and recreation,
Hmm.
right? So it's parks. As I lived in Miami for a while, and it's very hard in Miami to get the conversation beyond, soccer fields
Yeah.
and football fields and baseball fields, all the things that kids want to do in a park.
Mm.
Parks are for kids. And of course, but interestingly, the number one uh, asset that people want in parks, in neighborhood parks, are walking trails.
Yeah.
And so, so thinking about a park again as respite, as a
Mm.
place of peace, as a place of nature, as a place for changing, affecting the ecology and the climate.
Mm.
Those are not things that urban parks historically have been, have been asked to do. And yet, what the designers, I think, have brilliantly done at Tom Lee Park is to join up the very active recreational opportunities with gorgeous and provocative and meaningful art.
Mm.
They've built incredible habitat, outdoor classroom, pollinator lab, fountains. So it feels at once very urban, but also very, very much like a retreat.
Mm.
And that's all in that 30 acres. So it is, I think, is just an absolute jewel of a park, in a lot of ways points toward the future of park design
Yeah.
and park purpose.
Mm. Yeah. No, that's fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And the need for that respite and that access while also still having some amenities. That's really cool. That's really cool. So, I mean, are there any other aspects that, if our listeners end up in Memphis to go visit the Tom Lee Park that that they'll see, or any other amenities that you haven't already talked about?
The amenities in the park are, like I said, just really amazing. And I could name the fog and mist fountain and
Yeah.
the sunset canopy, which is just a stunning piece of architecture, and it's 15 degrees cooler when you walk underneath it. A playground to absolutely die for,
Yeah.
by Monstrum, the Danish company. The playground is made of, the theme is the river. It's made up of river critters that you climb in, on, up, down, the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's really just, it's fabulous. We have real food and real beverage,
Oh.
not snack food, junk food. We have serious food in the park, so we want it to be a place where you really can live life, and we call it park life. So all of those things exist, but honestly, you could, as I did yesterday, the weather, the heat left, and it was a beautiful, cool day, and just walking through, which doesn't sound terribly exciting, but just walking through gives me, it's a very different space, but it gives me the same feeling that I had when I walked through Lurie Garden in Chicago in Millennium Park. It just has such the calm, the peace, the beauty. The world is so much bigger than I am. The world, life, the life doesn't revolve around me. We're not going to solve all the problems by 5:00 this evening. But there are, the world is big and enduring, and it's just an amazing place. And so I certainly invite people to, come check it out. By the way, for the when the weather is still hot, the lighting for nighttime activity is just beautiful. Cool. It was done by the same firm that relit the St. Louis Arch, did the MLK Memorial on the National Mall in Washington, did the sculpture park in downtown St. Louis. Just phenomenal nighttime lighting, and makes you feel so secure, and yet it feels intimate. It's just beautiful lighting. So you can use it, after hours. And by the way, we have the best nightly show that every night with the sunset over the river. It's really just spectacular. So, and oddly enough, and I've lived steps off the river for decades. Just this will sound crazy, but the barge traffic up and down the river is so interesting to watch. And it's a part of our economy that's easy to ignore if you don't watch it go by and see how robust it is. So there are all kinds of things. Then the sandbars, pop up on the other side, and the river is always rising and falling. And so it is a very dynamic, changing environment that I think it will absolutely be worth a visit or two or three.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So, I mean, as we are recording, we're a few days before your grand opening. So is there anything special planned for the weekend of Labor Day when the park will be fully open to the public, or what do you guys, I'm sure there's tons of last minute details that we're
opening at Labor Day weekend. Yeah, we're opening at Labor Day weekend, September 2nd on Saturday morning with a fabulous brass band leading everyone down a new first time ever something we call the Carlisle Cut Bank Bluff. It's a beautiful sweeping walkway down from the top of the bluff down 30 feet to the bottom of the banks. And so the idea is to process down, cut the ribbon, turn the fountain on, process through the park for a blessing of the park by ecumenical faith leaders, and then down to the original Tom Lee statue for a beautiful water ceremony with the Tennessee Mass Choir. And then the whole park burst into activity starting at 1:00 and continuing until 10:00 at night with all kinds of activities. I mean, just yoga, hip hop yoga, double dutch, basketball skills, volleyball, circus performers, tattoos and face painting, music. It's Memphis. We have to have music. great music and Latin dance, everything. I mean, it's really, really going to be a lot of fun. Theaster Gates, who did the um, beautiful new sculpture in the park, will be here with some of his colleagues to introduce the new sculpture. We have local artists also doing engagement activities, creative activities around and in the new sculpture, which is called A Monument to Listening. And then those activities will continue both on Sunday and Labor Day on Monday. So should be a full, very, very, very full 3 days of activity.
Yeah.
But we decided really what we wanted to do was show the park and its features at their best, so that nothing overwhelms what we're there to introduce to the community.
Yeah. Oh, well, that sounds like so much fun.
It will be fun.
Yeah. It makes me wish I could be in Memphis for Labor Day weekend, but alas, that's awesome.
You could learn to double dutch. You could learn to juggle. You could learn to hula hoop. You could learn basketball skills, like Latin dance. There's a lot to learn.
Yeah.
And, we decided that part of one of the ways that people can feel comfortable in this park and feel welcome is we're inviting them to participate, not just to be consumers, not just to observe or spectate, but we really want to give everybody a chance to ultimately showcase their own skills and to learn new skills. And so it should be fun in lots of ways.
Yeah. No, yeah, it should be. That's awesome. And, I'm curious, like, obviously, this weekend's a big welcome and grand opening. And so you want to have tons of activities to kind of activate the park and show it off. Kind of going forward, like, how programmed out will the park be? It seems like you've thought a lot about, like, creating a space that's both welcoming and like a respite, but also you want to activate it at the same time. So will there be as many activities and programs as you're having this weekend, or is that kind of a way to welcome everybody, and then after that it might be a little more of a quiet respite kind of place?
Yeah, it's what there are parts of the park that will probably always be quiet and reflective, and there are other parts of the park that will be active and loud and fun and kids and ballers and people having a great loud time.
Cool.
So I think that's the beauty of this park. You can do both. And in a lot of ways, the program invites activation. You don't have to, it's great because we run a lot of parkland, right? Yeah. And we know what people respond to, and we know what gets used and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And so that gives us a huge advantage in making an investment like the one we've made in this park to try to get it right on the first go. Everything won't be right, but and we also know that people we can't afford, and I don't think people want to be entertained all the time.
Yeah.
It's just you can't afford to entertain people all the time. What you can do is make sure that the program supports people enjoying themselves all the time, and then obviously there will be burst of activity that we organize and invite people into. But we've even got a welcome center at the park that we've never done this before, and I'm excited, where we will loan equipment, all kinds of equipment for people. So that when they get to the park, and if they think, I wish I'd bought a ball and glove to, teach my kid how to catch and throw, we've got it. We've got hula hoops. We will eventually have the mini trampolines. We won't have them for opening, but we'll have them soon thereafter. Something that's too heavy to carry to the park.
Yeah.
We got lots of equipment for people to just try it out, learn themselves and just have a good time.
That's awesome. That's so much fun. Oh, cool. So, you've mentioned a couple of things that went into the planning around, this is a piece of like the broader riverfront that y'all are managing. And maybe because I also want to talk about your like overall like approach and kind of the whole riverfront. And maybe like as a way in, I'm curious, you mentioned the Army Corps of Engineers, part of the land for Tom Lee Park is as a flood control device. So I'm curious, you talk about managing riverfront parkland. Obviously flooding has got to be, you got to think about it. The river moves. So how much, I'm just curious what goes in the planning around that. How do you work with the Army Corps of Engineers around that? Like, because you want to have a welcoming space, but you also know that like there's other aspects that are outside of your control. So I'm just curious on like high level, not just for Tom Lee Park, but as you guys thought through this Memphis riverfront concept, like, how do you think about kind of the natural power and wonder of the river, and kind of as you guys think about activating these spaces?
It's a really good question. And we have spaces that typically flood annually.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, we provide for that. And this river, when it floods and then it recedes, you're left with some very strange things, not just driftwood, but occasionally a refrigerator,
Oh, wow.
occasionally parts of a house. I mean, it's kind of amazing what the river carries. Um, but I'll tell you the biggest one of the biggest tensions we have is people moving near the river's edge
Yeah. Yeah.
and expecting the river's edge to be cared for as if it's a golf course,
Yeah.
right? And there is more than a little bit of tension in that. People moving to a river's edge and expecting um, the banks to be kept clean. Don't let anything grow. I need my 180-degree view, from all three floors.
Yeah.
And it is so the need to balance habitat, to balance the natural, the protection of the river, the protection and the rebuilding of the ecology along the river, and yet respecting what property owners nearby want and expect is um, is an ongoing challenge.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons that last year we developed a viewshed document that looked at clear views, filtered views, and obstructed views along the 5 miles that we manage, and trying to help property owners understand that yes, we want to provide views, but there will be clear views, there'll be filtered views, and there will be obstructed views, all in it to actually make the views more interesting, but also to protect habitat and to balance those needs. And so that's the context in which we work, and to accept that when the river leaves you, recedes and leaves you driftwood, for instance, that driftwood is not to be removed immediately.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with driftwood. You live on a river that
Yeah.
rises and falls
Yeah.
every year, and if you, honestly, if you expect a golf course, you probably should live elsewhere.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
river, living on the Mississippi River
Exactly.
is not
Yep.
that kind of place.
Yeah.
We use no pesticides on the edge of the river, but some people remember it, how it was tended 10 years ago,
Yeah.
15 years ago.
Yeah.
Chemicals that we use should never have been in the river. Things are changing. We have, again, one of the best landscape architects
Yeah.
we can have in Scape to help us with Tom Lee. And we have moved to natural landscaping in a lot of our work. In almost all, every time we make a change, we are adding natural landscaping so that it is better equipped to respond to changing, climate conditions. And certainly this summer, which has been just broiling everywhere.
Yeah.
You see the resilience of those of those plants and the value of having them uh, better represent what is natural to the river.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. Cause I'll reveal my bias. Where I live in Jacksonville, I'm about a little less than a half mile from our river, the St. Johns River, which is a huge river that goes through the city. And I think it's really interesting to watch, both the ecology piece of like, how do you make sure these places are still welcoming to the animals and plants that called it home long before we did. And then at the same time, how do you create resilience within the city that has such a close relationship to water, and like a water that is going to rise and fall. And, and as you deal with climate issues and climate change, like there will be more water. And I think it's fascinating how green space can be used to kind of, both create welcoming spaces for people to use as a recreation, as a respite, but also as a way to be, as a way to protect, development and neighborhoods. And so anyway, so I was just curious on your guys' perspective because you obviously done a lot of planning and thought a lot about that.
We have. It is very much in our foreground every day. And one of the great things about Tomley Park is that early, at one of the very first steps that was made once the design was set, is part of the team collected with volunteers, went out in forest and parks around Shelby County, where Memphis sits, and collected seeds, and then germinated those seeds to be replanted in the park.
Cool.
Which was, a part of the natural, the quest to make the landscape robust and resilient.
Yeah.
By making it native. And so that's been fun to watch.
That's fascinating.
I mean, they're just, the difference between how we plant and tend landscaping today versus really even 5-6 years ago is dramatic. And I know that's happening in parks all over the country, all over the world. And that's a great thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. So you mentioned a little bit of the community engagement that y'all went through as part of the riverfront concept, and then the designing for Tomley Park. Is there anything else around how you guys are making kind of these parks open and welcoming to the whole community? Because I know that's always an issue in the front of minds of Parks and Rec professionals, is how do you ensure that the whole community feels welcome here, and how do you activate it for everyone, not just maybe the folks that live right nearby?
Well, we have an interesting condition, Ben, in that the people who live nearby are, in many cases, represent some extremes. Yeah. In that we have the poorest zip code in Tennessee, 6 blocks from the new entrance to our park. Wow. And that is a gift. I mean, those are people we serve every single day on the riverfront.
Yeah.
So they're very much a part of our community, and our, the people we serve, again, on a daily basis. So it's because of the location of the property, being so accessible to people of very low income and some people with higher incomes. It is, it's a unique opportunity to have people of different incomes sharing the same space joyfully at the same time. Mm-hmm. And we believe that really should be our quest, is to make sure that we have a park and a program that appeals across demographics, but particularly across incomes, and that we don't think about them in a segmented way, and that one group comes one time, one group comes another.
Yeah.
Our real question is, how do we make sure they're occupying the same space at the same time?
Yeah.
And we do that, I think, through the values that we express in the park. We do it with our welcome. We do it with our ranger training. Our rangers are phenomenal. They're so good at
Yeah.
what they do, and 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 of course, I mentioned some of the work that was done. The outreach that was done in designing the park,
Yeah.
the checking we were doing throughout to make sure we were delivering something that had broad appeal to the community and involving people in the design across a wide range of demographics. I will say this, we were challenged during COVID because so many important neighborhood scale institutions like schools and libraries, where you'd normally go,
Yeah.
right, engage people, to talk to them, to get their opinions, weren't open. And so we had to find ways around that. But fortunately, our spaces already, because, I mean, there is no other place in Memphis, Tennessee that you can see the Mississippi River. I mean,
Yeah.
here it is. So this this has sort of punches above its weight
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of allure, even without great design, because you've got a great river.
Yeah.
Now we've brought great design to a great river.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is, will have greater allure and more enduring allure as we go forward. So we consider the notion of being, we're not just welcoming.
Yeah.
We're really trying to achieve something that research says is the best way to get opportunity for low income
Yeah.
people, is for them to have loose tie networks, to use a nerdy phrase,
Yeah.
loose tie networks with people with greater incomes.
Yeah.
And we believe parks are one of the most powerful places to create those loose tie networks, because neighborhoods, the way we live, the way we sort ourselves in terms of home ownership
Yep.
and where we live, and the way we sort ourselves in schools, we are no longer using uh, those institutions, if
Yeah.
you will,
Yeah.
as places to bring us together. Increasingly, they represent our income segregation.
Yeah.
And so we think parks are, a great, offer great promise in the mixing that Americans so desperately need to do across incomes.
Yeah, well said. I mean, that's one of the beauties of parks, right? Is that they bring folks together from all backgrounds. So that's awesome. So just, as our listeners think about kind of what's next, what are you working on that our listeners should look out for? Or are there any other parks you want to highlight if folks are ever in Memphis?
Well, we have a number of spectacular parks on our riverfront. Greenbelt Park's the park I mentioned that floods every year, and you can get about as close to the river in Greenbelt Park as you ever could. And it's we've got a 50-acre park, 60-acre park, sitting right outside my window. I'm looking at. It was opened in 1982. I would say probably overprogrammed and imagined that in 1982. So that one requires a big rethink. We've got a bike ped trail that actually repurposes an old bridge across the Mississippi River that connects Memphis and Arkansas. That, again, bike ped trail there. We've got a bike ped trail, in fact, several of them that go across the city. We've not quite completed them, but they're completed in big sections that can take you from the riverfront ultimately to a fabulous park on the east end of town.
Nice.
Called Shelby Farms, another standout park done by James Corner. And So there, and a fabulous state park on the north in the north side of the county, which again is on the Mississippi River, but it's really hard to get to in that park.
Yeah.
But it's called Shelby Forest. So it's a place that is blessed with a number of beautiful park spaces right in the heart of the city. We have something called Overton Park
Yeah.
that was threatened with an expressway running right through the middle. And in
Yeah.
a very famous Supreme Court case, Memphians prevented that from happening. And it has recently seen a revival. So there's a lot to enjoy in the outdoors. You can get in a kayak and kayak the Mississippi if you're
Yeah.
really brave. If you're not, you can kayak the harbor.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to do in Memphis outdoors.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm excited to visit. So the last question as we wrap up is always the hardest. If you could be the GovLove DJ and pick the exit music for this episode, what song would you pick?
Oh my. Well, let's see. It would have to be Memphis music, and then there's so much to choose from there. But Take Me to the River, Al Green. That's not a bad choice.
That's perfect. That should be the soundtrack for when folks visit Tom Lee Park. So that's perfect.
Except that he's talking about a woman, so I don't know. But, Take Me to the River works.
Well, awesome. Well, Carol, thank you so much for coming on and talk with me. That ends our episode for today. I really appreciate your time and talking all about the work that you guys are doing.
Thanks, Ben.
And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders, and the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. You can reach us online at elgl.org/GovLove or on Twitter at the handle @GovLovePodcast. And you can subscribe to GovLove on your favorite podcast app. And if you're already subscribed, go tell a friend, a colleague, a neighbor, your enemy about this podcast. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. With that, thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast of the local government.